Indian mystics, U.G. Krishnamurti. U.G. Krishnamurti is among the most disturbing Indian spiritual leaders, given his denial of all spirituality. To discuss this enigmatic mystic, we have with us Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, how would you describe UG? As a philosopher, as a mystic, or a crackpot?
Definitely not a crackpot.
Okay.
Definitely as an enlightened master. Definitely as a philosopher, as he himself calls himself. He calls himself a sort of a philosopher. And I would agree to that, that he is a sort of a philosopher. A living philosopher, not an academic philosopher. He is uniquely placed as a spiritual leader of the 20th century, not the spiritual leader, but of the spiritual leaders of the 20th century, who refuses to call himself a leader, who does not believe in the concept of guru, does not say he is a guru or a teacher. Not only that, he goes to the extent of saying that all teachers are phony. He goes to the extent of saying all teachings are phony. The entire spiritual life is phony because there is nothing like an enlightenment to attain. The concept of enlightenment itself is bogus. And because that goal itself is a bogus goal, all those who talk about that goal and how to reach that goal are all phony crackpots. They have fooled themselves and they fool rest of the world. This is the kind of a very extreme iconoclastic teaching that he has, which to him comes out of his own experience, because he had followed, or rather been to many gurus. Not that he became a disciple, but he had been with many gurus, including J. Krishnamurti.
Okay.
He had also visited Ramana Maharshi. But all the spiritual practices that he did not lead him to anything called enlightenment. However, after he left all the practices and was living as a free, unattached man in Europe, in Switzerland to be more particular, he started having some transformative experiences which were essentially biological in nature. And this biological conceptualization of enlightenment, which is completely autonomous biological process, having nothing to do with psychospiritual practices or psychospiritual concepts, is something which puts him in a very unique position. Unique in the sense, he is enlightened because he is free from the compulsive ordinariness that you and I are subject to. However, he did not get into this position through any spiritual practice or following a spiritual master, nor is he able to explain what has happened to him in psychospiritual terms. He calls it a biological calamity, a transforming event, but purely biological in nature. Now, this puts him in a very unique position that he is an enlightened person. His process of enlightenment happened through a largely biological process. It happened after he had left pursuing all spiritual pursuits for a long time. And for a very long time, he was living like a free man, not knowing he was a free man. And his transformation happened when he realized that there is nothing to be transformed. He is already there where he wishes to be. And this created in him a sort of a biological transformation. So in the history of spirituality, we have very few people who went into the state of enlightenment through such a heavily biological process. For most people, it has been a psycho-spiritual process. In that sense, UG emerges as a very unique person in 20th century philosophy and spirituality, largely spirituality. And his critique of psychologists, spiritual masters, spiritual practices, and humanity in general exposes a lot of hypocrisy which is at play. Not that all that he says is true and everyone else is completely false as he says they are, but there is definitely an element of phoniness, an element of hypocrisy which has crept into our everyday life and our spiritual life. And somebody who is like UG is like a sunlight which sort of exposes and disinfects the shady pathogens which are simmering around in the spiritual world and in the world in general.
Okay. And how did you get in touch with UG?
It was largely an accident.
Okay.
Or let me call it destiny. On the positive side of it. It was at a bookshop. I got across a book titled The Mystique of Enlightenment. In that book, UG Krishnamurti is answering questions on enlightenment, and he demolishes the goal of enlightenment, the process of enlightenment. He demolishes spiritual masters, spiritual practices, and even psychology. So he calls Freud to be a fraud, and he calls Krishnamurti to be a hoax, and he calls Gautam Buddha also to be a phony person, and all spiritual masters of all times to be phony. And this sort of shocked me, because for an intellectual who is interested in spirituality, UG is like a Agni Pariksha.
Okay.
Because a person who is not an intellectual and interested in spirituality, he may say, my faith in something is fine. I don't have to reason out things. I believe spirituality is right. The goal of enlightenment is right. Spiritual master X in whom I have faith is right, and I'm going to follow him. But for an intellectual who is reasoning out things, when a critique like the one UG puts forward, it comes, you cannot rest in peace unless you have solved the problems which UG's arguments have created. That was my condition, that I was sort of shocked with such an extreme critique of everything that I had taken to be sacrosanct, almost obvious. And therefore, there were only two ways out after reading UG. Either you find reasons enough to say that despite what UG says, there is something relevant like spirituality, enlightenment, the spiritual process, and so on. Or UG is right, so throw away everything and just leave it to destiny. If something like enlightenment has to happen spontaneously and biologically, as UG says, if it has to happen, will happen. There's nothing that you can do about it, as UG says.
Okay.
So between leaving everything to almost chance or destiny and believing in a spontaneous biological change which may come, may not come, versus taking interest in self-development and doing something to move ahead on the path of spirituality, between these two, you had to choose. So for me, it became a challenge to find out where the fallacy in UG is and how that fallacy can be explained by use of language, use of psychology, use of philosophy, and personal experience. So UG is an Agni Pariksha for an intellectual interested in spirituality, because unless you have a very strong base in psychology, spirituality, coupled with your own spiritual experiences, your own experiences in psychotherapy, or with people at large, and a very strong dose of confidence. Unless you have those things in place, you cannot get out of UG with reason and confidence. You can run away from him, you can dismiss him, but you cannot come out of him arguing with reason victorious unless you have these things in place. And this was my journey with UG. First phase was the phase of being shocked and overwhelmed. And then was the phase of finding the fallacies, finding the possibilities where something that he says cannot happen can happen, and something on which he has not commented also can happen. So that was my journey with UG, from, I would say, from shock to being overwhelmed, to finding the fallacies, limitations, to coming out, transcending and being free from UG. That was my journey with UG.
Okay. So, what is so unique about UG?
There are many things which are unique about UG. It's not one. First is his critique of enlightenment. Because in the spiritual area, nobody has criticized the goal of enlightenment per se. Not even J. Krishnamurti. He would call it a choiceless self-awareness, not use the word enlightenment. That does not mean he does not put a goal state, even while calling it a goalless goal or a pathless path. The simple fact for all spiritual masters is this, that given where an ordinary human being is, where you and I are, is not the ideal state of affairs. And the state into which you and I are can only lead to conflict and pain, and a lot of things which we don't want to happen in our personal lives and collective life. And from this state into which we are, we have to go to a state where our difficulties are overcome. And these difficulties are inner and outer. And this goal state is the state of enlightenment. So this generic logic that we are all not where we should be, and there is somewhere to reach, and that goal is the goal of enlightenment, the destination is called enlightenment, that is true for all spiritual masters. Because if you don't have to go from state A to state B, there is no question of the spiritual process.
Right.
The spiritual process question arises only when there is a journey. If there is no journey to undertake, and where we are perfectly okay, then there is no question of spirituality or spiritual life.
Right.
So all spiritual masters, they agree on this basic fact that we are not in an ideal state and we should go to an ideal state. How ideal is the ideal state is a different matter. But it is much better than the state we are in. And this journey has to be undertaken largely inside. And for undertaking this journey, which is largely inside, but of course in connection with rest of the world, there are different techniques and paths which different spiritual masters show us. So the first thing is where Yuji says there is no spiritual goal to be attained. All spiritual processes are phony. It is like Yuji stands against the entire spiritual world. So this is something, the first thing that is unique about him, that although he himself has made this journey from being an ordinary Yuji to a transformed Yuji through a process which he calls the biological calamity, which transformed him forever. And he is no longer what he used to be. Despite having undergone that process and have reached a goal state, whatever that state is, it's radically different from what he was as an ordinary human being. Right, despite that, he rejects the goal state, he rejects enlightenment, he rejects all the spiritual processes, all spiritual masters. That's number one. Second thing unique about Yuji is he is ready to accept his limitations and even implicitly does not communicate infallibility, which unfortunately most spiritual masters do. Explicitly, nobody will say it, otherwise people will think he's psychotic. But implicitly, they communicate to others their infallibility and omnipotence. It's a very subtle, indirect communication. And much of it also is by sense of omission, that when somebody says something which implies omnipotence, they are not the ones to criticize and say, this is not true, I am not omnipotent. By their silence, by the sense of omission, they allow it to build up. Yuji is unique in that he does not allow anything of this sort to build up. Third thing which is very unique about Yuji is the way he looks at the human mind. He looks at the mind as being largely in the strange hold of the movement of thought and pleasure. And this movement of thought, as he calls it, is extensive. It also includes feelings and pleasure. And this movement is so fundamental and so strong, it will not stop even to destroy the very organism in which it operates in order to maximize itself. So for him, there seems to be no way out to free people from this strange hold of thought. Fourth, something very sacred to the spiritual traditions, which is the inner act of observation and awareness. Yuji criticizes that to say this is only a game of thought. It is just a thought that you are observing something, there's nothing to it. So the whole idea of self-observation, awareness, and transformation through awareness goes out of the window because Yuji calls it a thought game. Similarly, what Krishnamurti says, observing something without a word, that you look at a rose without remembering the word your rose and all the memory it comes along with it. In that moment of full awareness without any thought. So in that moment of choiceless self-awareness where there is no thought, you are only observing a rose without knowing it is rose, which means the memory is not activating. You are in a state of no thought. Yuji laughs at all those things, of this, all these games of the word and the thing. So Yuji also is unique in the sense he looks at reality not in terms of a rational reality, but in terms of a disjointed reality, that events are actually not connected to each other. It is our mind which connects them. And this brings Yuji in close contact with Immanuel Kant, who says that we cannot know the thing in itself in the outside world, what it exactly is. We can only have a summary of that so far as our mind allows us to do. So if the reality outside changes in the fundamental sense, or the laws of mind inside change in the fundamental sense, we would possibly experience reality very differently. So this experience of reality through the filter of the mind and not experiencing reality as it is a point on which UG comes very close to Immanuel Kant. And this he is able to say more from experience because in him, the continuity of thought has been broken.
Mm-hmm.
And because the continuity of thought is broken forever in him, he can see two events disjointed without establishing a causal relationship between the two or any associative relationship between the two. And this unique ability of his to perceive events, as Immanuel Kant would say, he goes from sensation to perception, but does not go to conception. So the way his mind is working now is the generic epistemological process of sensation, perception, conception, knowledge, wisdom, it stops at perception. He is not going to conception, and therefore the linking of two events does not take place. The two events remain disjointed. And that provides him with a very unique view on reality, which you and I don't have. UG also is very pessimistic like Freud and Schopenhauer, where he does not see any way to free people, and he sees ultimately this movement of thought, as he calls it, or this thinking apparatus which is completely for the sake of pleasure and power, will destroy earth and everything on it. And this is the title of his second book, No Way Out. That we are caught in the strange hold of circumstances. Inside, we are caught in the strange hold of this thought process, and outside by laws of nature as they are. And there seems to be no way out of this situation into which mankind is. And the only way out seems to be destruction, just a question of time when it happens. So in that sense, UG is also unique that even in today's world of technology when he lived, where we are at the sunrise step in a lot of areas like genetic engineering, information technology, material science, and so on, he is not impressed at all by all these advances or these prospects. And he joins the pessimistic thinkers and philosophers like Freud and Schopenhauer in anticipating the very pessimistic end to the human race and to this world. So in all these things, we see UG in a very unique way. Very few people of his caliber or his experience have taken positions that he has taken, and therefore he is a very unique person in the 20th century canvas.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. So I'm just wondering, how do you respond to UG's denial of mind, soul, Freud, Osho, Shankara, and everyone else?
I think this is an Agni Pariksha. Because unless you have very strong experience yourself, which cannot be shaken by theoretical arguments, or you have seen the truth of theoretical arguments in practice, in real life or in psychotherapy setup, or in any spiritual school that you are in, you will be shaken and you will not be able to oppose UG. And you will not be able to find the fallacies in UG. Like when he says, Freud is phony, I know Freud is not phony because I have seen Freud operates in me. Many of the things Freud say are true in me and are true in a lot of patients I see, a lot of other people I see. So for me, it is a certainty that Freud may not be completely true, but a lot of what Freud says is true. Lot of what Indian tradition says is true. Much of what Osho says also is true. Not that all that he says is true. But the direct experience of truth is so clear that there is no question that that can be wrong. What can change is how do you explain that why it is happening so? That can change. But that whether it is happening or not is not in question. So when UG says Freud is a fraud, I know it is ridiculous. Either the man has not studied Freud enough, has not done psychotherapy himself. So the brave man is shooting off the hip largely. He has not actually been deeply into Freud or Jung or Adler to really comment. And this is a difficulty with all Indian spiritual masters. They don't know where to stop. So they get into the shoes of experts and they make wholesale universal statements which are ridiculous, which are not based upon long experience. So this is true about UG also. When he says Freud is a fraud, Osho is a fraud, Shankara is a fraud, I don't agree with that, because I have found inside of me and outside of me many things true which Freud says, which Shankara says, which Osho says. One. Two, when he makes a critique of awareness as a game of thought, I know it is not true because I have experienced a state of no thought myself. To me, this is not a proposition. This is not an argument where X is fighting with Y. I have a direct experience of a state of no thought, and therefore I know it exists. So regardless of what UG says, I know it's not a game of thought. There is a state, a very distinct psychological state, where consciously there are no thoughts. Unconsciously there will be. Autonomous nervous system is still working. The autonomous psychological system also is working. So there is a biology at work which cannot stop working. There is an unconscious psychology at work which also cannot stop working. But what we mean by enlightenment, or at least the first step in enlightenment, is that the conscious thoughts cease. And that state is a distinct state which I have experienced myself. So I have no doubt that this is not a game of thought. Awareness is a real phenomena. Observation is a real phenomena. And the state of no thought is the goal of it. And it is a real phenomenon. So because of that direct experience and confidence, I know on this point also he is not right. Third is the disjointedness. On that point, I think he may be right that we know the world only through the apparatus. And if this apparatus undergoes a change, we might see the outside in a very different way. And the outside may be very different than what we know about it. So at that, I am with him. On spiritual gurus being phony and the spiritual process being phony, I don't agree with him at all. I think there is a very distinct spiritual goal, and the spiritual paths have some relevance of their own, significance of their own.
Right.
In his own case, I think he is not giving due credit to all the spiritual practices he did, because the final biological transformation which he underwent did not fall from heaven. Spiritual practices are of two types. One which are preparatory, and second which actually give you results. So there are preparatory spiritual exercises and there are those which give results. But without the preparatory exercises, the result giving exercises won't give results.
Right.
And this brings us to this old dilemma, which we'll talk sometime in other recording also, other episode also. What is the path to enlightenment? Should one make effort or not make effort? And this is a very old debate. Osho calls it the path of yes and the path of no. That in the path of yes, one goes out into the world. In the path of no, one recedes out from the world into a withdrawal, peace and calm inside. And in both cases, you can have tapasya or self-effort, or you can just leave it to existence.
Right.
So, if you leave everything to existence prematurely, nothing will happen. So there is a stage till which tapasya is necessary, effort is necessary, and after which you can leave it to existence. And therefore, the what is called the yoga or the path of effort, and what Lao Tzu calls Wu Wei, leave it to existence, just flow with the existence. They are complementary, they are not substitutes of each other. It is not an or situation, it is an and situation. It is not this or this. It is the effort and after that leaving to existence. If one does not make any effort and just leaves it to existence, nothing is going to happen. I feel Yuji in his own evolution does not give due credit to his phase of effort, which actually prepared him for the phase of no effort.
Right.
And if that part he had not done, he would have never got the final result. And that is where I think again, I am completely opposite in terms of opinions on what Yuji says on the significance of tapasya. That I don't believe that these processes which lead to enlightenment happen spontaneously without any reason. There is a long preparation, and after the long preparation, a time comes when one has to give up the effort. Sri Aurobindo says it very well. He says, effort was the helper, effort is the balm. So for a long time, effort is the helper. And a stage comes after which you have to stop making efforts, because then the more efforts you make, the more difficult it becomes. Effort is the balm.
Correct.
But there is no second stage without undergoing the first stage. So I think he underestimates or does not give due credit to his own first part of his life when he was making efforts. So this is the way I look at his opinions, that I agree with 2 or 3 parts that he says. One, that there is hypocrisy, phoniness, and assumption of omnipotence on the part of spiritual masters and spiritual schools. 2, that the outer reality may be largely different, radically different than what we think it is. 3, there is a possibility of seeing the events disjointed if we get into certain states of mind. 4, that this movement of thought has a strange hold on people, on all of us. And it's a very formidable thing, as he says it. And to that extent, I agree. The next step I don't agree, which he says, where he says, this will even lead to the destruction of the earth and the species, and nothing can be done about it. I am more optimistic. I think if we do the right things, we can prevent our destruction and destruction of the planet. So, if I look at my opinions on Yuji, I don't agree with the first part that he said about Freud or Shankara or Osho. There is merit to what he said. And I think we should give due credit to those who have contributed a lot to the march of civilization. Shankara, Freud, and all spiritual masters have contributed a lot to the flow of civilization, and they don't deserve to be dismissed or ridiculed as UG does.
Right, right. Yeah. So how do view his critique of movement of thought?
I think the movement of thought, as UG says, is comes out as two different ways the entity is formed. One, it is suprahuman almost, the way UG tells us, because it is not within the control of a person. And UG says there is no way to control it. Thought is the only instrument we have, and it's a very difficult instrument that we have.
Okay.
So that being the case in UG's thinking, that thought is the only instrument and a destructive instrument, it is very difficult to move forward. But if we look at thought, that there is a possibility of thought working upon desire and thought working upon thought, whereby the destructiveness of the apparatus can be reduced, then I think there comes a way out of it. And I am optimistic about it. I don't share UG's pessimism that thought is the only instrument that we have. I think working at the level of energy, working at the level of karma, working at the level of emotions also is working. So thought is not the only instrument that we have. Also, thought is also not absolutely a destructive instrument. Desire, although difficult, is not something that cannot be worked upon. Yes, minimum of desire has to be lived out, and that leads to frustration, pain, conflict, and violence. But I don't think there is no way out. I do believe there is a way out. And the mental apparatus, as UG has described, is not a correct description of the mental apparatus. The mental apparatus is far more sophisticated, far more layered, far more an assembly of very different things, and far more malleable to being worked upon and being changed for the better. So UG's picture of the mental apparatus is not something that I agree. UG also sort of magnifies the effect of human history and tradition on our minds. So it is almost like if you look at Lacan, UG is looking at a historical big other. And UG's description of the way mind operates is almost as though the accumulated historical big other is the real force which is keeping us in its strange hold, along with the force of desire. But this is not how I see it. I see the force of history, tradition, and the big other far less in quantum than UG sees it. So in terms of the model of the mind, in terms of which entity in the psychological apparatus is how strong, with respect to how positive or negative we can be with regard to prospects, with regard to the constitution of the human person, with regard to the significance of spiritual processes, with regard to the significance of psychotherapy processes, with regard to the possibility of good psychosocial-economic changes. On all those facts, on those aspects, I feel I am very different in my opinions compared to UG and far more positive than he is.
Right. So do you think it is conceptually possible to save concepts and spiritual goals from UG's attacks?
Yes, it is. And it is only by saving them I actually came out of UG. Otherwise, I was overwhelmed by his attacks.
Okay.
And this would be true for anybody who is seriously interested in spirituality and psychology and goes into UG. Because his attack is a formidable attack. It is not an attack of an illiterate person. UG himself is a very well-read, very profoundly thinking, educated person. So his attacks are not the attack of a crackpot or a layman. These are very profound attacks. So yes, it was only by saving them that I could come out of UG. And the saving happened when I saw limitations and policies in UG's thought. And the first was, if you look at what were the policies, the first was delinking his own phase of effort with his phase of enlightenment. Two, describing the mental apparatus in an oversimplistic terms of the strange hold of thought and the movement of pleasure. Three, not looking at everyday experiences where the Freudian concepts, the Kleinian concepts are working. Psychotherapy is working, science is working, physics is working. Four, not looking at everyday experiences where working on energy, working on emotions, working on karmic stuff, working through meditations, working with thought upon thought are bringing positive results and lasting changes. It is not that nothing is happening. Whatever is happening may not be enough. That's a second issue altogether. But to principally say that in principle this is completely bogus is not right. We can look at what innovations are necessary to make the impact higher so that the impact is significant. That is a different discussion. But to in principle say that this is wrong is a very different discussion.
Right.
So when we look at the everyday experiences of ourselves inside and outside, and of many others who are with us in this area of psychology, philosophy, spirituality, we see that what UG says does not actually come true in practice. And lastly, the confidence that comes from a personal experience. That to be the fact that energy healing works, the fact that there is a state of no thought, the fact that awareness is not a thought game, the fact that we can be in a state of no thought, for me, these are experiences, these are not theoretical concepts. So when you look at that kind of thing, you realize there are fallacies, limitations, extreme statements which don't stand the scrutiny. All those things are there in UG. So those limitations considered, we are able to save what UG attacks, and the best savior is experience itself. If experience shows in psychotherapy that Freudian concept works, what UG says about Freud completely goes out of the window in the light of that experience. And as psychotherapists, we have this experience every week, every month. So what UG says is proven wrong every week, every month for us. So once you have that confidence of experience, the confidence of self, experience of certain spiritual states, and a very clear conceptual understanding, I think we see the limitations and fallibility of UG, and we are able to save the concepts, conceptually speaking. And of course, experience saves or destroys what works or does not work. So experience is a far better savior than conceptual thinking is.
Yes. Yes. So I'm just thinking, how does one fit UG spiritual experience into our paradigms?
I think UG creates a new paradigm in recent times. Indian spiritual tradition is very ancient. And in that spiritual tradition, we find a few people who experience spiritual transformation the way UG did. But these people were not intellectuals, and therefore they were not able to make an impressive impact upon large population. It was also a time when media and communication was not so easy, so they could not market themselves in a way. But I am told, I have not read, but I am told a few names in Indian spiritual history where they had similar experiences. So UG fits into that paradigm. The paradigm of a biological transformation to enlightenment. And this is something which leads us to the fact that, not the fact, but to a position that I have been advocating for some time. That we need a dedicated discipline of spiritual psychology to understand the different states which people call as enlightenment. Because different people call different states as enlightenment. For some people, what is a goal state is for other people an intermediate state. And we need to create a discipline of spiritual psychology which studies these different states of enlightenment. And once we do that, we will have paradigms into which to fit people based upon their experience of enlightenment. And in that sense, UG would fit into the paradigm of what appears as a spontaneous biological transformation. It is not actually spontaneous. It is preceded by a long effort and tapasya, but that is much before the transformation actually happens. And therefore, the two look to be disjointed. This is a unique way in which this transformation happens. So UG fits into that paradigm. UG also fits in terms of the post-enlightenment belief into the paradigm of agnosticism and nihilism. Because he is like a super Buddha, where Buddha would say everything dissolves, nothing remains in nirvana. And he would say even that nirvana is bogus. So nothing remains. No goal remains, no process remains. Which for Gautam Buddha was not true. For him, in the state of nirvana, nothing remained. But to reach that state remained as a goal. And the processes to reach that state also were very clear to him. There may be multiple processes. Maybe one person has each process. But still there are processes. So for UG, he fits into the paradigm in terms of spontaneous biological transformation and post-enlightenment expression in belief in terms of agnosticism and nihilism. What is important is that of all that he has said, much of it may not be true, but his expressions and attacks have at least exposed the fallacies, limitations, and hypocrisies of the spiritual part of society, and that cleaning up, I think, one should welcome.
Right. And how would psychoanalysis look at UG experiences?
Psychoanalysis, I don't think, is the right tool to analyze these experiences. But if we apply UG's disjointedness can easily be the cognitive thought disturbance. It can be because of the attacks on linking then the linking is not taking place. And the attack may be of aggression or envy. Another aspect of UG where the yin and yang have come together and UG experiences himself more like a combination of a masculine and feminine, not as a pure masculine male person. That in Jungian terms is the integration of the anima and the animus. From a psychoanalytic standpoint, it can also be the difficulty of early life attachments where one is not able to attach to anyone now any further. And it can also be a deep disappointment because of failure of a narcissistic project. That it is a midlife crisis of a narcissist where one gives up all further projects or enterprises to be undertaken because one is so deeply disappointed at having not attained what one started off with. And for UG, it was true. For him, it was a narcissistic project and a single project in his life to become enlightened. And he did everything that he could and nothing happened and he finally gave up.
Right.
So this is the way psychoanalysis would look at UG and try to somehow explain his later life in terms of the childhood, explain what he calls enlightenment as a problem. But I don't think that psychoanalysis is much right in this regard. I think this whole supernormal experience area is something psychoanalysis is yet to contend with. So the moment psychoanalysis sees something supernormal, it tries to apply to the supernormal the tools which were actually created for the abnormal. And at times the tools apply, at times the tools don't apply.
Okay.
So UG, I think, is one of those cases where it is not right to apply psychoanalysis in the classical way.
Right. And what would you see as shortcomings in UG's ideas?
The first shortcoming is there is no positive prescription. It's only a criticism. Criticism can be step one, but ultimately what to do is the question. UG's thinking brings us to the point where you realize everything is right, not right. A lot of things are wrong and nothing can be done about it. So I think it brings you to a position of helpless and resourcelessness pessimism. That is the first problem. Second, UG does not explain in terms of a coherent model of the mind what is happening to him. So he is not able to create a structure out of the disjointed experiences or even explain those disjointed experiences themselves as they are in terms of something that can make sense to us. So this is a second limitation. Third, most of the times he is into iconoclasmal criticism. Now that cannot help anyone who is in trouble. So the basic situation that humanity is constantly moving towards a better state. There is an evolution taking place at all levels, from hunger to economics to society to environment to technology to morality. With all the immorality around, we are still far more moral compared to those days when slavery was in place and brutality was everywhere on earth.
Right.
So there has been an evolution and we are moving towards something better, even though there are ups and downs in between. So this is It is the upwardly moving spiral. It's not a linear line. It's an upwardly moving spiral with its own ups and downs, but the overall movement is upwards.
Okay.
That being the case, UG does not prescribe any program, any thought, any idea, any suggestion on what to do in this movement. It appears, UG comes across as an angry child, not as a wise old man. So that is a very important limitation. The fourth limitation is the description of the functioning of the mind in terms of the movement of thought. That again has a lot of problems. It's not a very accurate description of the way the mind operates. Mind is far more meticulous, composed of far more different structures who come together to create that apparatus functioning. So this also is a very important element. And in terms of the collective life, collective policies, which are political or social in nature, which affect all of us, UG does not have anything to say except to point out the imperfections in each of them. Now that is fine. We know all collective policies have drawbacks. That does not mean they don't do anything. If the government decides to give 1,000 rupees to everyone every month, it does not solve all the problems of the world, but it does solve some problems of the world.
Right.
That kind of a practical positive approach is not there. The approach is of, because something is not perfect, you just reject the whole thing. So these are many limitations. The good part about UG is he shakes us up and forces us to think and look afresh, and also see the imperfections, the hypocrisy, and the difficulties which are sept into the spiritual world and which call for cleaning.
Okay, right. So final question is era for UG over, or does he also belong to the future?
I think the UG's era will be over very soon, because when this kind of iconoclastic spiritual masters come, they have a shock value for the movement. But in the long run, people want a prescription, a spiritual path, a clear goal. They are not content with somebody who just criticizes everything, puts everything apart, but does not give an alternative. So people want a clear positive goal and a clear path towards that goal. People are not looking forward to somebody who is just criticizing and not giving an alternative. So UG has a lot of value to shock people, make us think afresh, and make us see the difficulties in the spiritual world which have sept in, and to clean them off. But beyond that, I think except for a few people who are extremely angry and frustrated, or a few who are cut out for this kind of path, very few of them, I don't think most people in future will look forward to living the way UG did, or modeling their life on the teachings of UG. So UG will remain as a Agni Pariksha, a litmus test for intellectuals interested in spirituality. The questions he raised will continue to provoke people and contribute to mankind. But in terms of everyday living and a school to be created or a model to be followed, it is less likely that in future a large group of people will follow UG.
Right. Well, it was a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. we have discussed today on UG Krishnamurti. Continuing our series on Indian mystics, we shall have more such discussions in coming episodes. Do watch and write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste.
Namaste.